We'll just take a few minutes and let a few more people join, and then we'll dive in. 𝘧𝘪𝘳𝘰𝘮, Yahlnaaw 𝘓𝘬𝑑𝑖 𝘗𝘪𝑗, 𝘧𝘪𝘳𝘰𝘮, 𝘬𝘪𝘳𝘠 T'enneh 𝘗𝘓𝘓𝘪𝘯𝘨. Hello, wonderful people. My name is Yahlnaaw, and I am from 𝘧𝘪𝘳𝘏 𝘓𝘧𝘬𝘓. I am currently situated on 𝘓𝘧𝘬 T'enneh territory, also known as Prince George, as the Indigenous Programmer at Two Rivers Gallery. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional unceded territory of the Lheidli T'enneh, and I would like to thank them once again for allowing me to live, work, and engage in amazing community events such as this situated on this land. So welcome everyone to our very first Learning from Sharing, Perspectives Through Storytelling event. This is a recurring storytelling event that works alongside our current exhibitions organized by Two Rivers Gallery and moderated by myself, the Indigenous Programmer at Two Rivers Gallery. This series invites individuals with unique backgrounds to share various forms of stories and the knowledges embedded with our community. This series invites individuals from various places to share their stories in different forms, and through the act of storytelling to explore knowledges that are embedded within our community. So today we have the absolute pleasure of Kym Gouchie from the Lheidli T'enneh Nation and Marcel Gagnon from the Lheidli T'enneh Nation also to join us today to share stories in the spirit of our current exhibition, 𝘧𝘓𝘳𝘊𝘳𝘊, Little Fires, featuring work by Indigenous filmmaker Amanda Strong. This exhibition is on display until January 1st at Two Rivers Gallery. 𝘧𝘓𝘳𝘊𝘳𝘊, Little Fires, encompasses themes such as cultural revitalization, finding identity, family ties, and drawing upon our ancestors' knowledges. So to start us off, I'd like to welcome Kym. If you would like to start us off with your story, that would be great. Hawa, thank you.
Masicho. Howdy, everybody. It's just an honor to be here in this space and this virtual space, which is the new way of gathering. And as a storyteller, as a musician, an artist, this is something that we're embracing. It doesn't change the connection that we have. You know, our feet are still on the ground together, and I hope that the stories that I share with you today will stay with you and will resonate in you. I'm going to share some excerpts from a play that I'm working on at the Sunset Theatre in Wells, BC. It's a part of the exploration series, and the title is Her Blood Runs Through My Braids. And it's a story that's in development and tells the story of my carrier grandmothers, my 𝘬𝘓𝘬 grandmothers. And I was very blessed to have, at one point in my life, I had 4 surviving grandmothers on my mother's side and my father's side. And I had relationships with all of them. And I was closer to some than others. And it really depended on, I believe, the way that they were raised and the connection that they had to their mothers and those relationships that were built. And so I'm sharing stories from memory. I'm going to share stories that are written into a way that will be delivered as a one-woman play. It's still in development. I'm actually quite nervous to share this right now, but I'm pretty sure you'll all be forgiving if things, yeah, I'm sure it's gonna be fine actually. But I want to start out in a good way and open the space with a song, which is also considered one of the highest forms of prayer. And this song actually is titled "Her Blood Runs Through My Braids." And it is the last song that my late grandmother, Mary Gouchie, wrote. She didn't write, she translated for me before her passing in January 2019. And the song calls upon my grandmother. It calls upon all of our grandmothers. As soon as we grab the drum and we start to beat the drum, we are honoring our ancestors. We're honoring them in this space. And I hope the audio is going to be okay on your end. I know that's one thing that is a constant situation with our new technology. So I'm going to do my best. I'm going to take my microphone and hang it down just a little bit so we get a little bit of both sounds. Thank you. So I live out here in my traditional territory, 𝘓𝘓𝘬𝘓𝘓𝘬𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝑒𝑡 And this is my late great-grandmother, 𝘧𝘳𝘰𝘮. And this is a painting that I did many, many years ago. And I thought, what a beautiful space to bring her into. And she was blind, and she was like the most incredible woman that I've ever known, ever witnessed. Her strength, her resilience, her everything about her really helped to shape my life. And I want to share a story about her. And I'm going to share two stories, actually. One is about my late grandmother, who's also in the carrier language, and Dakhaus language is Atsu. And then I'm going to share another story about her daughter, my other late grandmother, Mary Gouchie. So, oh, I need to have a little bit of a drink here. Where did we go? I hope everybody's doing okay out there in these very unusual times in our world, taking care of each other. All right, here we go. My blind granny only had one daughter, and her name was Mary Magdalene. She also was my only surviving grandparent. Born during the Great Depression, in a time when food was rationed and work was scarce, Granny Mary had a hard life and had to work even harder because she was the eyes for her mother. She was born in a government-built house on Indian Reserve No. 2 on the north side of the Fraser River near Shelley, BC. This was after her parents found themselves displaced from what's now known as Prince George. I was always taught that my Granny Mary, I'm going to back up just a little bit. I always thought that my Granny Mary looked like the Queen of England, with her perfectly curled hair and beautiful jewelry. After all, she was a very dignified woman and a language keeper. You see, actually, Granny had always had poker straight hair, which she really hated. Every Monday, it was a ritual for her to sit and do her hair. She would take recycled dryer sheets and bobby pins and would roll thin pieces of white hair up into right curls. It always fascinated me, and as I'd watch her do this. She never let me help her, though. She said that nobody would ever want to touch that hair. So I would just sit and watch and listen to her stories. This was a special time together. And it was during these times that she would tell me the stories of her life. And as a child, she learned how to set snares to catch rabbits, how to shoot a gun to set night lines for fish, and where and when to pick berries. She became the provider for her family. Granny remembers how hard it was to take care of her blind mother and get back and forth to school on foot. It was especially hard in the wintertime when it was often 30 below. She always looked forward to the spring. She waited patiently for the pussy willows to bud and the birds to sing their songs. She remembers it was in the springtime when the ice was breaking up on the river, when her father decided to move them closer to the school. And as they were moving, The chief hollered from over at the next house and said, "If you move off this reservation, you're no longer band members." Her father looked at his wife and his little girl and her, and said, "Let's keep on going." I could still hear the hurt in my granny's voice when she told that story, and they never did look back. I could tell that it brought feelings of loss and shame. So I reached out to her and I touched her hand to bring her back into the moment. I believe that Granny used those feelings as motivation to work extra hard to make a life for herself. She never asked anyone for anything, not ever. And if she couldn't buy it, she just wouldn't have it. She learned this survival skill from her mother and her mother's mother. Her roots run deep into the earth, past the frost, and into the very core that brings us life. Handetsen hunsu daya katsu 𝘧𝘬𝘳𝘓𝘓 akatsuten inges 𝘗𝘓𝘬𝘮𝑗𝑠 𝘧𝘬𝘰𝘮. There's one story that sticks in my mind the most, is when she made the difficult decision to send her 3 eldest children to residential school. You see, she was so poor that she thought that they'd be better off there getting 3 square meals a day and have a warm place to sleep. She had no idea that her decision had put her children's lives in jeopardy. Her hands trembled as she lifted the hairnet and carefully placed it over her curls. She seemed sad, so I shifted the energy and I asked her, I said, "Granny, why do you always use recycled dryer sheets instead of rags?" And she looked me straight in the eye and she smiled and replied, "Why throw them away when they're still good for something? Besides, they make my hair smell good and they keep the static away." So I have one more, and this one honors my blind grandmother. My great granny was a full-blooded carrier Indian woman. She was also Catholic and blind. I never seen anyone pray as hard as she did, not in my whole life. She would pray for all of us all of the time. She told us that we needed to go to church and that if we didn't, she would say, "You'll see, you'll burn." I could still hear her voice. Every Tuesday, the Catholic pastor would come to our house to give her communion. And as he would be leaving the house, she would reach under her petticoat and she had this little purse that was safety pinned under there. And she would pull out her little wallet and she would reach in and she would have her money folded just in a certain way so she knew which were 5s, which were 1s, which were 2s, because there was 1 and 2 paper monies back then. And she would pull out a dollar bill and she would give it to him. And that was a ritual in our house. That was how devoted she was to her beliefs. My dad was an alcoholic, and my granny would always pray for him, that he'd change his wicked ways and stop drinking. On Christmas Eve, about 40, well, it'd be more than 40 years ago now, my dad was still drunk and he took her to midnight mass. And he stood at the feet of Jesus and he fell to his knees and he cried out, "I am a sinner. Lord, forgive me." And he said the sinner's prayer, and he never touched a drop of alcohol since that day. My granny sure knew how to pray. She always wore dark clothes out of respect for her late husband. She'd wear a black scarf to cover her snow-white hair. Her skin was a beautiful brown with deep, endless wrinkles that all joined together at some point or another and told a story all of their own. She had a few teeth and was almost deaf in both ears. I cringe when I think of the times that she told me that she pulled out her own teeth with pliers. I actually witnessed that. Her pockets were stuffed with tissues. She never wore pants, always a skirt that went just below her knees to hide the elastics that held up her skin-colored stockings. As one of her closest great-granddaughters, I loved to bring her a cup of tea, lots of sugar. She always slowly slurped it and smacked her lips. I'll never forget that sound. There was a little round table that sat next to her favorite spot in the living room, and that's where that cup of tea would sit too. She knew her way around the house by following the walls. She knew where she was all the time we knew where she was all the time by the sound of her clunking cane. She'd tap her way from room to room, to the kitchen, the bathroom, to the dining room table. Blind Granny would sit and sew all day except for Sundays. She had pieces of threads and scraps of materials that followed her everywhere she went in the house. She would call my mom, "Robin," and she'd say, "Robin, I crazy. Look what I do." Being curious, I would always run to see what was happening. And here she had sewn her quilt to her skirt. So when she'd lift the quilt, up would come her skirt, and we would all stand there and laugh. And then she would say to me, "Kym, you fix." That was my job. So I would go grab the little seam ripper and I would carefully remove the quilt from her skirt. And then she would hold up her little blanket, which would basically cover your legs, but in her mind, in her eyes, it could cover a whole bed. These were really special gifts. Each quilt, she would fold it up carefully and put it aside, and often she would make them with a certain person in mind. If somebody brought her rabbit, deer meat, any wild game, she would remember that and she would often gift them with one of these special little quilts. As a child, I believed the stories about how my granny went snowblind, that a medicine man had put a potion in her eyes and burnt them right out. I would sit in front of her and I would make crazy faces and do crazy things, and because I really believed that she could see because of the amazing things that she could do. So I believed these stories because her eyes were literally sunken in her head. And it also, going snowblind and having a medicine burn out your eyes sounded far more interesting than glaucoma, which was actually what had happened. Her eyes deteriorated from the treatments that she received from Western medicine till finally she was completely blind. They say that her loss of sight was triggered by the brightness of the snow. Robin! Still snow outside? Long time ago, we, us. Oh, just wait. I'm gonna get a little bit into character so I can make this really like my granny. Even though this isn't black, it's still a headkerchief. Is that what they call it? Headkerchief, handkerchief, whichever. This is what it is. Okay, here I am. I'm her right now. Robin, still cold outside? Long time ago, we, us. This is how my granny always would start a story in her broken English. My mother, she told me that my hair is sacred, that I need to keep it in braids. She said our hair, it holds our memories. We keep it and never leave it laying around. Otherwise, somebody might use bad medicine on you. Kymie, you take care of your hair. One time, my cousin 𝘚𝘩𝘢𝘳𝘃, she had bad medicine put on her. There was a Cree man who he came from way over the mountains. They still said he was real ugly, couldn't find a wife. My cousin 𝘚𝘩𝘢𝘃 saw him at a town hall dance. She felt bad for him. When they danced together, he got a hold of one strand of hair. It was laying on her shoulder. He stole it and he put it in his pocket. My mother always told me, our hair holds our strength and we need to take care of it. 𝘚𝘩𝘢𝘃 never had feelings for that man before, but after that dance, he started visiting her in her dreams. She couldn't stop thinking about him. She married that Cree man. So my girl, you never let your hair lay around and you stay away from those Cree men. You take your hair out of your comb and you hide them and then you burn them. Granny was a prayer warrior. And when she prayed, God heard her first. I remember one night she was craving to eat grouse. And she told my mom, Robin, you find grouse. I want to eat grouse. And so she went into her room and she said, I'm going to pray long ways, which meant she was going to pray really hard. And she would kneel by her bed with her rosaries in her hands. And she would pray in the 𝘓𝘳𝘢𝘃 language. And that the Lord would send her a grouse. So, this is a true story. In the middle of the night, there was a crashing sound that woke everybody up in the house. And my dad, he got up and he went and he looked around, checked everything, checked the doors, checked the windows. Nothing seemed to be out of place. And it wasn't until that next day when my dad was out doing some yard work that he noticed out in the snow, underneath my grandmother's bedroom window, laid a grouse, all sprawled out there, deader than a doornail, ready for the oven. So we all were amazed And we've always been amazed at her incredible faith and her prayer. But my dad, being the funny guy, said to my granny, "Granny, I'm sure glad you didn't pray for a moose." And those are my stories for you today, everybody. Masicho for listening. Thank you for, just thank you. Thank you for being here in this space. Thank you for joining us today. And I look forward to completing this work that I'm working on. I'm going to be heading into Wells sometime in possibly April, we're looking at, if this COVID thing can settle down, and to finish and share the stories of my 𝘓𝘓𝘬𝘢𝘓𝑚𝑘 grandmothers, my 𝘓𝑢𝑚 grandmothers on my mother's side, and to bring them all together in a common thread. And that is, her blood runs through my braids. Thank you. Masi.
Kym, that was beautiful, so well articulated, and I could almost just picture your grandma in my head. And when you dressed up and really embodied her and embodied her spirit, it really made the story so special. And I'm so grateful that you were so willing and open and vulnerable to share such an important and beautiful story that's so near and dear to your heart. So Hawa, again, thank you. Next, we have Marcel Gagnon. And Marcel, why don't you just take us away, take us on a journey. I think we're having a technical difficulty, I think. Just one sec, Marcel. Just Marcel, we just need you to unmute yourself on your end and then you'll pop up.
How is that?
Perfect. There we go. Sorry about that. Take us away.
Well, I'm going to share my story. I am one of 20 children of the late Margaret Gagnon. My mind can't fathom sometimes having 20 kids. I just recently found an interview that was done with her in 1987. I'd never read it before, and I was actually stunned as I started to read what she went through, losing children, so many children. Today there's 6 of us. I'm the 3rd oldest now. It's been a hard journey sometimes for me when I think back on it. My mom was enfranchised in 1949 because she had not lived on the reserve she'd been off the reserve rather for 3 weeks, and that was enough to warrant losing her status. So they took her status away because she was 3 weeks off the reserve. just before I was born. So I spent all my life trying to get a status card. My older brother passed away. When he passed away, he hadn't gotten his status card at that point. I made myself a promise that I would really fight and get that card. And in the end, I did. I was so happy and proud that I had that card until I was in, I went to a powwow. I'm just going to go a few years before all this, but I went to a powwow. I was about 36 years old, and I'd never been to a powwow in my life. I lived off the reserve all my life, and it was the first time I'd ever gone to one. And I remember I was president of the society, and the drummers came in first, and they put out their big powwow drum, and they started to drum. And you know when you're going to cry, you feel like something grabs your throat and it squeezes it, and you just have trouble breathing. I felt something grab my throat when I heard those drummers, but I shook it off. And then all of a sudden the dancers started to come in, and it grabbed me again, and I couldn't shake it off the second time. And before I knew it, I'm standing there with all these dignitaries, and I was the host, crying uncontrollably. And people were trying to calm me down, putting their hands on my shoulders and everything. And the crying wouldn't stop. And I was telling myself with my hands over my face, trying to hide from the embarrassment of crying, and saying to myself, quit crying, why are you crying? I couldn't understand. All of a sudden, I look down and I see there in front of me rows and rows of little bells. They look like tiny little bells. And I'm looking down at them, and all of a sudden this hand came out, and it went under my chin and lifted my chin, and there in front of me was this beautiful older lady with beautiful white braided hair. And she said to me, she had the big beautiful feather, and she was holding it up, and she says to me, I don't know who you are, my boy, but the drum's calling you home. And I kind of looked at her and shook it off a little bit, and I said, what? And she said, the drum is calling you home. And she smiled and handed me this big beautiful feather, and she joined the other dancers and she danced away. I tried to run from that incident, and I found myself, because I'm a musician, I was playing bars and cabarets and everything, and trying to run from what she said to me, because it was very, very hard. It was like something inside me, so old, was awakened at that moment. That drum woke something up inside me. And finally, I just said, okay, I'm not going to run from it anymore. I want to know what this is. And I took a job working at a treatment center way out in the middle of nowhere. And it was there that I made my first drum. And nobody was around, because between camps, I was all alone. And I made my first drum, and I would sit out on the little dock, and on the lake, and I would just pound my drum. I didn't know what I was singing, right? You know, all this stuff. But it felt good. It felt like whatever it was that I tried to deny was finally coming out. When I got my status card, and I was happy about having it and everything, it was then those questions started to sneak up on me. That incident with that beautiful old lady, the big drum and everything. And it's not about my status card at all. It's about the medicine man that was in me, that has always been there, that has been passed on genetically. I guess they call it epigenetics in regards to trauma and everything, but for me, it only doesn't apply to trauma, it applies to good things too. So whatever my ancestors were and whatever they believed in was passed on to me genetically. I truly believe that. So I set out then on this journey of wanting to know, or beginning to know, that there's more to me being Native than having a status card. And that was the beautiful part of my journey, was I found along the way that I'm honoring all those that have crossed over before me, my mom, my family, my brothers, my sisters who sit in that place of honor now. All those that went way before them, they're still there. They're still here with me. So when I go to ceremony, I call them 𝘓𝘓𝘳𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝑒𝐴, the ancestors, and I always acknowledge them when I'm doing ceremony. And I thank you, my ancestors, for being there, because I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. I play drum, and but drum for me is mostly in ceremony. This beautiful little instrument here, I had one. I saw pictures of myself when I was a little boy, and I had a little guitar. I think I was 3 or 4 years old. I'm like, now that makes sense. Now I know why I'm a guitar player. So if you don't mind, my interview isn't going to be very long, but I want to do this song for you. I write songs about real things and real places and real people. Discarded stones, they almost forgot. Pleas for help, desperation almost. Is anyone here? We've come to an end. Give us the shirt, the one of the ghost. But on deaf ears it falls, behind elderly wall. And enemy line, beneath cloudy sky, looking through closing eyes, and everything shy. Then out of the dust rose a man of the cloth. Carried the stones, he dusted them off. In concrete inert, oh, in hunger and thirst. The first shall be last, he cried, and the last shall be first. But on deaf ears it falls, behind elderly walls. Those enemy lines, those blurred lines, beneath of himself. He's looking through the closing eyes, and everything shines. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening to my story and my song.
Marcel, that was an amazing combination of musical and storytelling components that came together to tell a really beautiful overarching theme and a glimpse into your lives and your life and your thoughts. So again, Hawa, for that, so greatly appreciated for your openness and your willing to share with us. And again, Hawa, to both of you for that same openness and willingness to share these amazing stories. It has been an absolute privilege. And another thank you to our audience who has joined us today to engage in a beautiful and intricate part of community building, which is storytelling. In addition, keep an eye out for future learning from sharing perspectives on storytelling or perspectives through storytelling events coming up in the near future, and hopefully we'll be branching out into various community partnerships. So again, Hawa, all take care, have a good night, and we hope to see you again soon.